I'm Brooke Masters, the Opinion and Analysis Editor of the Financial Times, and this panel is going to be about addressing diversity in business, specifically about the role of companies, how they can drive social change, and what are they doing, what's working, what's not. With me are three really great panelists who I think you're really going to enjoy. We have Silke Muenster, who is the Chief Diversity Officer at PMI. We have Mima Simic, who is a Croatian writer and an LGBTQ activist. And we have Aviva Wittenberg-Cox, who is from 21st, which is a consultancy that helps companies address gender issues, including gender balance. So we have people living it, doing it, and then people on the outside who are happy to criticize and give us better ideas. Silke, can we start with you just to give us a little sense of the lay of the land? What are big businesses doing? How far have we come? And what are the barriers that lie ahead?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brooke. I really think that currently most businesses actually understand that inclusion and diversity is a business imperative. And as a testament, you see that many more chief diversity officers are currently, I think, looked for in the industry. I think for us at PMI, it's even more important, probably because of our transformation, because inclusion and diversity is desperately needed to drive our transformation going forward towards a smoke-free future. We need innovation, and we need the innovation which comes from inclusion and diversity. And we also need a representation of the diverse consumer groups which are out there, and to better understand their needs. Consumer centricity is important today for everybody, and inclusion and diversity is clearly a driver for consumer centricity. And a lot of progress has been made. I think, talking about our own numbers, we come from 29% of female representation in management in 2014, and we are currently at 37%. With regards to our senior leadership team, we moved in 1 year from 8% to 16%. So quite some progress, but I'm pretty sure we can all agree that this is not going fast enough, and that we need to accelerate this. And the numbers, even when they are increasing, are still too low, and we need much more progress to come.
I guess on that note, maybe we'll give Aviva a chance to talk about what is working and what's not working.
Yeah, and perhaps I can just give a note to Silke's idea. I'm not so convinced that we've come so far. I think we can see that there's very clearly a first mover group of companies that have achieved a certain degree of balance of various different kinds. I work on gender balance and nationality balance specifically. It's very easy to check, right? These are not hard numbers to look at. You look at the executive team of any company, and you can immediately tell how important and strategic this issue has been, and whether or not they're gender balanced. We put out a scorecard every year on which companies are balanced and which are not. It's still a minority group. Some of the most successful companies in the world have done it, and they are outperforming those who haven't. So the evidence base for why you want to think about doing this is growing. The pressure from an ever expanding range of stakeholders is also growing. And I'd say how companies do it is still a little bit stuck in the past, right? In my particular focus area of gender balance, a lot of companies are still stuck in, we got to fix those women. We got to make them look and act and behave as much like men as we possibly can in order to succeed. And if they're not ready to do that, well, then too bad for them. The second wave of what we see a lot of companies addressing now is, and that we've heard some of it in the panels in this conference, is this unfortunate framing of blame the men. They're all biased. A real problem of bias, as though only men are biased and we are not. Very unfortunate kind of moral positioning that a lot of women have, which I think is not helping our case. And I think one of the key issues is how companies frame the topic. And as long as it's framed as a women's issue or even a diversity issue, which I think it's neither, it's now a strategic imperative for companies to reflect the reality that women are now 60% of university graduates globally. They make 80% of buying decisions. And if you aren't reflecting that in your own talent and customers, you're behind. And it might be a good time in crises like this to catch up.
Speaking of that, because obviously we are talking about a crisis time for all of us, that's why we're all sitting in our bedrooms rather than on stage. Do we think that this crisis, it clearly creates an opportunity, but has it also created problems?
I think every crisis creates both at the same time. So the 2008 crisis, we saw exactly the same kind of thing. Some companies use the crisis to leapfrog forward on some strategic initiatives, of which gender balance is often one. Balancing of various kinds, the combination of Me Too, BLM movements, the stakeholder pressure, government regulation, the spread of things like shared parental leave, means that companies can now really push this agenda forward. On the other hand, if you're struggling to survive, you fear for your salaries and your people and your ability to just hang in there, a lot of companies will hunker back into where they feel safe, which is with the people they know best. And that means losing a lot of the kind of differences and new people that they might have been developing in the last few years. So you're going to see a bit of both, I'm afraid. And you're going to see some companies really driving forward and some really falling backwards.
But I feel like in this crisis, is one element which is one element which was really important is that we have all seen that flexible work can work. So we were all forced to a certain extent, but we have seen, when everybody sits at home, companies still, continue to exist and continue to perform actually much better than anybody had thought. And this was really an opportunity for us to take this opportunity and reshape our flexibility arrangements, which we had in the company. And while we are still in a situation where in most markets, actually people have to work from home because offices are not opening, but once offices will open again, we have established a policy which allows people to choose when, depending on local regulations, of course, but to choose where they want to work from. And I think this is also a rethinking, because I'm not sure, but in international companies, one way of getting promoted is always that you move from one country to another. And we know that usually it's females who are much more held back when it's said, your next job is going to be, in a different country. And there's a rethinking happening whether the move needs to happen or whether people can do the jobs from a different country. And I think to that extent, I'm pretty hopeful that this will have a change and a change which will stay with us going forward and actually offer more opportunities for women going forward.
Mima?
Can I just jump in? I'm wondering about there's a lot of opportunities as you're mentioning about like working from, being dislocated, but also there's a lot of home labor and domestic labor and kid labor that is now again put on women. Even if women are in a higher position in a company, they will, when it comes to kind of domestic context, they will be again the ones doing most of the labor. So I think when there's an opportunity to return to the office, I'm sure a lot of women will be flocking back to the office instead of having double or triple labor at home. And I mean, there will probably be a lot of research, as a lot of research is coming out already about domestic violence that's now happening against women and girls in the lockdown or these like COVID times. And I would like to go back to the first question. It's really interesting, actually, and I have to be the ultimate party pooper here. I think we really have to think about the context we're talking about. I come from Croatia, which is, it's a very specific, again, political situation. We had a war not long ago, I mean 25 plus years ago, and there's still the same kind of discourses, and one of the discourses is the repatriarchalization of the whole society. So if corporations and if companies are actually very often a reflection of an atmosphere, you cannot really expect even for all these like gender progresses to be done if the country is pushing the patriarchal or patriarchalization buttons. And like to add in with my own experience, up until like 3 or 4 years ago, I was working for one of the biggest Croatian media corporations. I was an editor there and a translator, and 90% of my team was on a contract illegally, basically. I mean, so workers' rights, not even like to come to gender balance. I mean, if we live in a country which allows for these kind of loopholes in workers' rights kind of field, people are being very insecure when it comes to their jobs, and they're happy to have anything, and there are no mechanisms to protect workers. So when we talk about progresses, I think we really have to be very aware of the context that we are talking about. And in my, where I work, there was no initiative for any kind of LGBT. I mean, I was out all the time because on the one hand, when you're a freelance, it's easier to be maybe like to be going around and being out. But I know a lot of people who are closeted basically because you're afraid in this context to come out, and there are no mechanisms to protect you, not in the society and not in the company, obviously. So I think this discussion is really like kind of very wide actually. And geographically,
I think yeah, you're right. Absolutely, it's different in different companies. I know Aviva is dying to jump in.
I was going to add that countries are like companies in that there will be countries that leap forward and countries that fall back. I do think that a lot of, ever since 2016, we can see, and your colleague Gideon Rachman, I think it was, wrote, a column very clearly saying that a lot of the reactionism, the return that Meme is talking about to patriarchal systems is a reaction to the rise of women, right? We have transformed the world in the last 50 years. We run countries and companies, and that speed of change has been unbelievable. I think the technological change and the gender shifts in society are incredibly fast and destabilizing for a lot of people. And I think this particular crisis shows and accelerates two of them, right? The technological shift that Silke was talking about is both extraordinary, that we can now all work from home, and suddenly the flexibility women have been fighting for 30 years has been proved to be highly efficient in a matter of months. And now bosses themselves, leaders can see that productivity is improved. And at the same time, the rise of women and the changing gender balance at work has a huge incidence on the gender balance at home. And that is something we thought we could sort of leave behind and move on. And Mima, I couldn't agree more. There's still a question of, okay, when all the support systems are turned off, what is the power balance at home? And who is going to take a turn? And, things have changed a lot. I think there are an awful lot of younger men who have picked up their fair share, and I think we should really salute the changes that have taken place among men. We're constantly sort of quoting women as victims, but things have changed, not as much or as far as we want. And I think it's also useful to applaud men. I notice that on a panel like this, it's all women. I think one of our roles going forward is to engage men in this conversation and to recognize them as full partners in this change at work and at home.
Silke, I'd be really interested on how you all at PMI are trying to address the question of the double load at home and this question of bringing men along and making it feel that they are gaining from this. They're not losing, they're gaining from the change.
Yeah, I think good question, and is no easy solution. I think during the crisis, to be honest, I almost felt like a broken record. How often we sent messages out that men have to take care of women who have the burden of homeschooling and or parents who have the burden of homeschooling, which we all agree is in most cases women, just to take care, especially during the crisis, and make sure people are mindful of the situation which is happening at home. In general, of course, we all know that in order to agree on different split of the burden of all the work at home is going to be parental leave. Super important and very high on our agenda, is a must to have. And I think getting men on board, and again, for me, that's almost a positive of the crisis. I think because we all had to change our habits, and we know how difficult habit change is. But I think many people were reflecting on their habits and their rituals and their values, especially. And what we have seen at Philip Morris is that we have a lot of men talking more also about female representation in different decision-making bodies. I think that was really a positive shift, and I think there is a kind of impatience currently, which we have to use this momentum to accelerate equality, because I see this impatience within our employees with regards to injustice of all kinds for all minorities, and there's a lot of discussion going on, and we are having some series which is called Inclusive Conversations, where we talk about race and ethnicity, as well as LGBTQ, all the issues of different minorities. But of course, we also have started, because we talk and we know Aviva for a while, but we clearly have started to work with management teams and male management teams to make sure that they own the way going forward. So I think it's not us, inclusion as an inclusion and diversity team, who decide what needs to be done, but they need to own the agenda. And currently at this point in time, I'm super positively surprised how well this is working, because men really take this as their issue. And I see this also as a consequence of everything which is happening around us.
Do you think that what we have and are accomplishing right now is going to last? Or do you think, I know in my workplace, we're very concerned about when we go to hybrid teams, where when everyone is at home, there was much more sympathy and effort to make sure that everyone was included because everyone's lonely. My sense is as more people come back, it's different kinds of people who can come back or who want to come back. And that may be creating a whole new set of problems, particularly women in places where the schools have not reopened, can't come back, and yet they're getting left out of conversations. Aviva, are there ways for companies to make sure that it doesn't become a new set of, anchors on success for women and parents more broadly?
Yeah, I'm glad you put that word in, because it's not just women who can't come back. It's a parent who's going to struggle, right? And usually two parents. And so this constant emphasis that women, one of the roles in organizations is to gender neutralize care responsibilities, not only of children, but one of the key issues of our time, particularly through this COVID crisis, is our elders that we have not cared for very well and just leveled a whole bunch of them by lack of care, which falls equally also on both genders, right? So a lot of organizations are becoming, I think, better at realizing that all individuals have caring responsibilities and require flexibility. I think that there may be some short-term problems in the next year, but I'm amused, or rather kind of stymied by the media's constant focus on how this is bad for women, when really this is what we have been pushing for decades, is more flexibility, more attention to care. And suddenly we have male leaders across all these organizations put into the same situation as most of the women who work for them, which is an enormous wake-up call and awareness building exercise. And I think they have a better understanding of the costs of not flexing, understanding, integrating. Are they all adjusting? Are they all doing it well? No, it's going to take now a few years to get the systems in place. I think, as Silke said, shared parental leave is really moving through and legislating into a growing number of countries. And so I think all of this is helping to do what we've been trying to do for a long time, is level the playing field between men and women and lessen the differences between them. And it doesn't help us women to keep saying it's a women's issue, it's a women's problem, and women are going to suffer. Men and women and all parents and all parents will be negotiating re-entries that are going to be hampered by their care responsibilities. And companies, in all their policies, all the work I'm doing with organizations, the language and the policies are strictly gender neutral because they have to be. That's been done in the last few years. It's just that now a lot more men are being affected by those policies and interested and engaged in them.
Mima, you've been the reality check up to now. I was going to say, you want to give us a reality check?
Well, no, I just wanted actually to add on this. When you asked if this is going to be a lasting change, actually this global crisis reminds me very much of the Second World War. I mean, I was not there at the time, but what happened is actually like when men went to war, the workplace was open for women, and then after that, things couldn't change. Women didn't want to go back into the kitchen. So this is the global tectonic move that is going to open up new spaces for reconstruction. So I don't think it's ever possible to go back to how things were. It's not going to be only policies changing. It's going to be people's hearts and minds and people's everyday practices, because it's about it's about units. It's about family as a single unit that creates the global scene. And when things have to change there, they're going to be changing all the way around. So I think that there's no going back from here.
A lot of men have discovered the joy of family, right? And the joy of working home, and all these people moving out into the country rather than into cities so they can have home offices and things. That's going to change family life for a lot of people going forward. Not everyone.
I was thinking we might want to get a little more granular about sort of not just equality and opportunity broadly, but really specific things. I mean, if you think about what companies struggle with, there's sort of recruiting, there's retention, and then there's sort of getting people from middle management up, and then there's sort of gender pay gap is another issue. And I'd be interested in what you all think of where companies are on each one of those. Where are we succeeding? Where are more companies succeeding, and where is it really very difficult? So could you have a thought on this?
To be honest, I have a thought of not only a thought. I know those numbers for us very well, and even there, it's super difficult to say it's only one issue, because even depending on the function you are talking about, and depending on even the country you are talking about, problems might be slightly different. And I know this is not. Usually people say recruitment is easy, and companies who focus on recruitment, they are lazy. But to be very honest, when I look at our numbers, recruitment is one of our major issues. Is like we have a target for 50-50 recruitment of females and males, and even though we have this target, it's super difficult to achieve, and sometimes definitely because of a lack of female applications. So I think that is one problem, and the other problem is promotion. But promotion, honestly, is for us more a problem at higher management levels. That's where we see promotion is a problem. And if we all look at this pyramid, which is not only for us, and very few companies I know don't have a pyramid anymore, but we still have a pyramid where we have fewer percentage of females in senior positions, and it's obvious that promotion is one of these elements which we have to overcome. But for us, definitely recruitment is a big problem.
I jump in to say that. Yeah, I jump in to say that most of our sort of large multinational global clients outside of tech, I'll make that exception, are very gender balanced at the bottom. in a lot of countries, they're starting to say they have more women than men. And I'm starting to hear the same language I used to hear about women now talking about men. Oh, we'd love to have more men, but they're no good. We can't find them. They're not the same quality. The same kind of conversations are flipping. But I'd actually say that the issue is not, or we at least try and reframe the issues away from immediately jumping in on a sort of HR focus of, okay, the 3R, recruiting, retention, promotion, which is a lot of how people will analyze these. There's a first step, which is leadership, culture, and systems. So are your leaders actually aligned on prioritizing this issue? Because if they're not, forget it, it's a waste of time. There's a lot of pink washing, greenwashing, and all kinds of nice statements about this stuff. And we hired chief diversity officers, but they have no power and they don't report into the right people. Then there are cultures. What's the brand? What's the employer branding? What's the culture of the organization? Is it so alienating to one gender or the other? If you're not recruiting enough, if women or men are not attracted to your organization, it's usually because of your culture. And finally, systems. Do you have the systems that support or distort the goals that you're trying to put in? And that's everything from on the customer-facing side, sales and marketing messages like advertising. You can see a lot of advertising that is very alienating to one gender or the other. And on the talent and talent management, do you manage women's and men's parenting cycles? Do you give some flexibility in the 30s, or is that still that kind of crux key decade of career acceleration, which tends to disfavor parents of any gender? So before you get into the real granularity, there's some strategic positionings which really involve, are your leaders and managers actually skilled in addressing the shift that you want to make? And that's the first step.
That makes sense. Mima, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I was wondering, also a really important thing, I think, is like how you create the culture of a certain company. I mean, you can install policies, but unless people really meet their coworkers, because to create this sense of belonging to a company, which is an alternative family with it's probably, I mean, families are usually far sicker, I think, but let's not go there. I think we forget about the horizontal kind of communication of the message, because you might have policies installed, but unless people will find them oppressive, it's like a similar thing with political correctness. So you have a set of rules of accepted behavior, but unless you understand why these rules are in place, unless you've met somebody whose lives these rules are saving, actually, in the streets, at home, in their own family, I think the culture will not be thriving. So I mean, to me, it's always like, for me, an important episode in my life, which was very enlightening, was like after several pride marches in Croatia, and the first 5 or 6 years we were being basically all the time attacked, tear gas bombs were thrown. It was very violent, and I came to my older brother, who is a white heterosexual guy, and I asked him, like, why don't you ever come to a pride with me? And he said, like, well, that's your struggle. And I was like, I'm going to kill myself right now. And then I gave him like a 45-minute speech. He's known me. At that point, he had known me for 35 years or so. And if my brother doesn't understand that my struggle is his struggle, is everybody's struggle, then we have a huge problem. So the sense of having a company in which everybody feels like they can come in and share that difference or diversity, or everybody can come out in any kind of way. I'm not talking only about like sexuality or whatever, that everybody feels connected in this like joint human experience. I think this space also needs to be created through, I don't know, social events, or I don't know, my strategy has always been kind of engaging humor, seduction. I went on the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire show to out myself, to kind of catch people off guard, to be political in non-political spaces, to do politics through interpersonal connection, to storytelling, sharing sharing the commonness. And I think like because you spend that at work, you spend like more time with your work colleagues than probably with your spouses and your kids. So this needs to be a safe space, and this safety cannot be only created top down with policies. It needs to be created horizontally so people can be like sharing. So whether it's like one evening a week or a month where people come in and come out in all sorts of ways, whether somebody writes poetry or you know what I mean, some shared vulnerability of being human that actually binds people together in this like, and then there will be better workers, if you will. I mean, they will be happy to come to a community that accepts them, and if problems start, they can go to HR and report. I mean, this obviously the policies need to be in place, but also there needs to be feeling connected to these policies and understanding.
Silke, have you tried in your company to create sort of an atmosphere of shared struggle, whether it's about LGBTQ issues or parenting or caring for elders? I mean, how do you do that really effectively?
Yeah, let me first, I think, agree to what both Mima and Aviva have said before is like, diversity and measuring the numbers of, how many female representation we have is almost an easy task and is only one element. Being inclusive and the sense of belonging, that is actually what we try to achieve, because this inclusion is important to leverage the benefits diversity can bring. But without having an inclusive atmosphere where people belong and feel they are heard and listened to, I think this all doesn't make sense. So I think one element, of course, is what is called employee resource groups, which we are currently, we have employee resource groups in some markets, but we are currently creating global employee resource groups, and especially during the crisis. So we had, for example, one internal series in our internal communication channels on health and well-being and on resilience, and where people were sharing their struggles and what they did to overcome this. And we had a global webcast where we actually asked employees to be internally on stage and in a forum like this to share their ideas around this. I think that has been really well received, and we have in this the last inclusive conversation we had was on race, and we had people with from ethnic minorities and sharing their struggle within the society and within PMI, to be honest, and that was really employees were impressed also by the authenticity and the openness employees were showing, and this is so touching, because it's always heart and head, we know. So it's like you need to create those stories which really bring closer to people what the struggles are, and I think everybody is somehow knows the struggle, how it feels when you are not belonging. And that is what we are using also with our managements, actually, that we remind them of those situations where they themselves were not belonging to a group, and how this feels. So I think that is super important, and through these conversations we try to open up for allies also, and for those minorities.
Aviva, are there any easy isn't the right word, handy techniques for doing that sort of you can share, if somebody said, okay, I really want to do this and make it more inclusive. I mean, what would be the first three things you tell a company that wants to try to create this sort of atmosphere to do?
Make sure that your leadership team is actually aligned on why they want that to happen, what they want it to look like, and how they themselves are going to be accountable for the change. So while I agree with this sort of horizontal idea, if it's not verticalized, if your top team doesn't buy it, doesn't know how to sell it, isn't skilled at leading the change, which most of them aren't, right? There's a lot of will. There's not much skill in these executive teams on some of these topics. Forget it. You're wasting your time and energy, and you're unleashing. I mean, all these employee resource groups and affinity groups and getting people excited and the horizontals that you're talking about, you're opening a Pandora's box when you start them, right? Because you raise expectations that something's going to happen. And that requires having leaders that are actually ready to invest in a change. And what I see a lot of is really frustrated and disappointed activists inside who've been pushing unpaid, because of course a lot of these roles are done by women who are not paid, for topics that aren't addressed strategically. So before you start opening the Pandora's box, my recommendation is, yeah, just start with the leadership team. Make sure they understand the business imperative of balance. I wouldn't call it equality. I don't think companies are founded for. They're founded for building businesses. So I think you have to help everybody understand how gender balance impacts what companies were set up to do, which is deliver products and services that clients want. And that kind of a business focus, I think, saves some of these initiatives from being nice to haves that won't get the support, financing, and focus that they need to be successful.
We have a question from the audience that is slightly off topic, but I actually think is quite interesting, which is the question of cognitive diversity and how that should be addressed. And the question is specifically, what does PMI think about in terms of cognitive diversity? But I'd also be interested in both of your points of view. And it's not clear to me whether it's cognitive diversity as in terms of people who perhaps are on the spectrum or have another issue, or whether it's just a range of views. But so answer it whichever way seems interesting to you. Silke, what do you think?
Honestly, I'm not sure how I would I would understand cognitive diversity is like. I think we are thinking of course, if it's in line with unconscious bias, I think, or not unconscious bias, I think that's always a topic everybody is trying to address. I'm relatively skeptical, and I think we had the discussion in the forum before. There was a discussion also about unconscious and conscious bias. I think the problem I always have is the moment somebody has done an unconscious bias training, that doesn't mean that this unconscious bias is gone, unfortunately, and you almost need a constant reminder. But I think that's a difficult problem and needs constant reminding. And as we all know, habit change is rather difficult. But maybe Aviva has some ideas.
I think cognitive diversity is incredibly important to innovation, creativity, high-performing teams. I think it's not always very well understood. And I think I'm a little suspect when I hear an all-male team, tell me that they're very cognitively diverse. And that's proof that they're pretty diverse, and okay, they don't have gender balance, but they have lots of cognitive diversity. I very often hear those kinds of statements from people who are reluctant to become diverse in some other dimension. So a little skeptical of its use. But I've never met a manager on the planet who is not in support of diversity of thought on their teams. But I also have rarely met teams that are truly cognitively diverse. So we tend to love to work and hire in our own images, and then try and point to some kind of diversity within the group that surrounds us. I think in the future, we will be getting far better at evaluating and measuring and then composing teams that are truly balanced in a variety of metrics that really count for our business. But I don't think we're not quite there yet.
There's another question on how to create psychological safety within an organization. Mima, you gave us some examples, but do you have a couple tips, like how do you create a safe space?
I was actually even thinking today that I don't know if there is a practice in any of the companies to have some like counselor. Like of course you have HR to report to, but somebody who's an expert in psychological, that would be good. Or to have a person that's some kind of a connection, somebody who's been trained in psychological help, because like there are specific problems that are related to a workplace that you can, that it would probably take much more, like if you had to take your problem outside. So that could be, but I think that safety comes from really knowing your colleagues. I would go back. I mean, Aviva said that it's important for the management to understand the business logic behind this kind of horizontal activities. But I think the ultimate thing is, like, are you happy at your workplace? Are you looking forward to going there, or you think that you're going to be bullied, or you're going to be harassed in this way or another? And I mean, you're going to leave the company if you don't like the culture, if the culture is oppressive. So the business logic is to have happy workers who feel safe. And safety is created vertically, obviously, through policies, but also like through bonding. So I think this is part of but also maybe to have an expert, like a counselor, or I really don't know if this is a practice in any companies to have somebody like, in schools you have a psychologist, you can send your kids to. I don't know how it works with companies.
I think psychological. Sorry, I think psychological safety is a pretty revolutionary concept that was developed a lot by this lady Amy Edmondson at Harvard. And I think it's not that complicated. It's not about really having psychologists and therapists. It's, again, about equipping managers with a pretty easy management skill of how they listen to people and how they manage a team to make it actually democratic, that every voice is feeling comfortable enough to say what they think. That doesn't take lots and lots of psychologists. It takes good management. And it's not really where we come from. We come from hierarchies and, power balances that were pretty hierarchical. This is a slightly more democratically thought through culture in both teams and companies that allows everybody to speak and know that they won't be punished for speaking their mind. And that's also not yet entirely common, but it is in high-performing teams. That's definitely one of the key factors of getting teams that outperform.
Silke, any thoughts on how you can do that, or successful things you've done?
Psychological safety, of course, is kind of is to a certain extent is the basis, and as Aviva said before, it's all about people feeling they can speak up. And I think this what I always find important is that when people talk about inclusion and diversity, is always the nice part, and it's all, no, it's not about the nice part. It's inclusion and diversity. Inclusion means that we can agree to disagree, and that there's a constructive dialogue, because in order to have this innovation and innovative thinking, you need to have somebody to disagree. And that links back to this cognitive diversity. Is like, it's and again, is like having a group of, you can have even a diverse group in terms of gender, but if they are all engineers, honestly, there will most probably not be a lot of diversity of thought in that group. So I think it's important to create this atmosphere where you actually can speak up. And I think all our inclusion training and what we are doing is going into that direction, that people accept that disagreeing and constructive dialogue sometimes means disagreement, is part of our culture, and that's what we are actually looking for. So it's part of the trainings we are doing going forward.
We are actually at the end of our panel. I think this was incredibly interesting to listen to. I think, to summarize, just for those of you who've been listening, it seems to me that the key lessons seem to be, it's important to empower people to speak up. It's important for senior management to buy in and not just mouth platitudes. This isn't easy. And I would say that the whole question of having people work at home, because it has called so many things into question, creates opportunity. And all of that seems very exciting, and I'm really happy to have had such a nice, thoughtful panel who interacted, talked to each other, and didn't interrupt. So, no mansplaining here. Thanks so much, and thanks for joining us, Silke, Mima, and Aviva.